there's hundreds of thousands of American deaths. In fact, the casualty death toll estimate, it ranges, there's three independent estimates. It ranges from 470,000 to now 900,000, according to CDC mortality data.
Let's bring the noise.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Daily Rumble. I am your host, Mike Dean. Today we have a special guest, and that is Nicholas Holscher.
Yeah, my name is Nicholas Holscher. I'm an epidemiologist at the McCullough Foundation, and since 2023, I've contributed to the publication of nearly 30 scientific studies now, looking at various things ranging from COVID-19 vaccine injury syndromes, potential treatments for that, childhood vaccine injury syndromes, the determinants of autism, as well as cancer treatments.
Nice. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted you to have on. So I have a personal experience with a vaccine that starts with a P. I don't want to say it because I don't want them to try and sue me over it. But I got their booster shot. That was my second shot. And within a week, I was in the hospital. I had a cardiac event is what they called it because they could not figure out what was going on. I had no blood clots that they could find, but my heart stopped. I completely fell out in the living room. My wife heard me fall. She was upstairs. She came downstairs. I was completely unresponsive, turning blue and not breathing. So she called 911. They walked her through the CPR. Fortunately, our first responders were super quick to get there. She said they were there in like 5 minutes. And they were able to get me to the hospital. I was in and out of consciousness for 3 days. I don't remember any of it, and went through all kinds of specialists to try and figure out what was going on. And the crazy thing about it was I had just had my physical with my doctor, and he had said, "Man, you are in great health. Blood pressure's fantastic. Your blood work came back great." I mean, at that time I was 47. He's like, for a 47-year-old, like you're basically got the health of like a healthy 30-year-old. You're doing great. I've always been athletic, don't drink, don't smoke, none of that negative stuff. So the doctors were completely baffled. And by the end of months worth of testing and going back and forth, they finally just said, well, only thing we can think is you had a bad reaction to your booster shot. What do you think about that?
Could you say again how quickly after you received the shot did you have the cardiac event?
About a week, maybe week and a half.
Okay, yeah, so my opinion on that would be, particularly since they looked at everything, they couldn't find anything. I would say, yeah, there's a very high chance that that was definitely due to the vaccine. You said it was the third dose?
Second dose.
Second
Yeah,
dose.
I never went back.
Okay.
Never went back for another dose. And then in fact, I had recurring events for that preceding year or for that following year. So basically what would happen is my entire face would just turn really red all of a sudden. I would get this rushing pressure in my head, get really, really dizzy, really weak, and I would collapse. I did ended up having to go back to the hospital for another emergency ride about a month after I got out of the hospital, and I was able to recover from that. This past year, I have not had any episodes. In total, I had 32, I think 32 episodes. My wife would know better because she kept track of it. And then finally, like, they became less and less and less as time went on. And then this past year, I was finally able to get back in shape, back to training 6 days a week. And again, I know a lot of people are like, oh, yeah, you're probably doing steroids. I don't do steroids. I don't do TRT. Everything is all natural. That's the way I've always been. So I've been recurrence free for a year now, which has just been fantastic. But for that first year, it was absolute hell. Like, I went from being very fit 47-year-old to feeling like I was 75.
Yeah, that checks out. Unfortunately, with so many other individuals that have experienced very similar outcomes, where it's, yeah, like a few years of just debilitating cardiovascular adverse events that seemingly occur every week. or more often, and then it does slowly kind of resolve as it appears some of that, perhaps if there was cardiac inflammation or some sort of clotting disorder, impairing blood flow. There's so many different things that these mRNA injections cause. It's hard to pinpoint what could exactly be the exact cause of that. But I would say, do you remember if the batch number started with E?
You know what? I don't. I don't.
Okay, because
I
that's
I
that.
just yeah, the only thing I know is that, we both got the P shot, from that company, not the M company, and, yeah, it was the first time I got the shot, I had almost no side effects. A lot of people, they would get the shot and then they would have, some pretty a really rough day. My wife got it and she was just laid out. She was so much pain, sick, everything for 24 hours, and then she was fine. And then the same thing with the booster shot. I didn't feel anything. I was like just normal. Didn't feel even the slightest bit effects from it. And then week and a half later, I'm waking up in the hospital. My wife's telling me, I thought I lost you. It's like, what? What happened?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, you're very lucky because unfortunately some people, would go through the same thing and they died. In fact, there's hundreds of thousands of American deaths. In fact, the casualty death toll estimate, it ranges, there's three independent estimates. It ranges from 470,000 to now 900,000 according to CDC mortality data. So, hundreds of thousands were unfortunately terminated by these inoculations. And so, yeah, but it is great that some people were able to, dodge a major bullet with regards to fatalities. And, what we're so very concerned about is that, they're still being given particularly to, 6-month-old babies.
Yeah. So what is it? I've heard a lot about like this spike protein. What is that the cause of this or a part of it? What is the spike protein?
Yeah, the spike protein is highly pathogenic, which basically means it's highly dangerous to any living organism. It's part of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that helps it attach to the cellular receptors, the ACE2 receptor it's called, to facilitate entry into the cell. And so, but it also is the most lethal and dangerous part. And so that's why it was an absolute disastrous, foolish decision to utilize that part with the injections because they couldn't have picked a more dangerous part for your body to produce. And so with the shots, your body will make this protein itself, right? It's not going to be externally encountering it. It's going to, and unfortunately we've now uncovered there's multiple studies. We published a few on the human biodistribution of where do these injection materials go, and they go everywhere. They go to the heart, they go to the brain, they go to the bone marrow, the immune cells uptake them, the reproductive system uptakes them. And then once it gets in there, that modified synthetic messenger RNA tells those cells to produce this spike protein. And so when you have your own body producing a highly pathogenic protein, those cells will be targeted for destruction by your own body because your body does not want, foreign proteins being produced. It's going to think those cells are defective and dangerous. And so that's
Yeah.
why we saw a lot of different syndromes in people because, it could span basically any organ system that had the largest uptake of these materials.
So I had actually just discovered this yesterday. Apparently, if I'm correct in the information that I was reading, they were running the human and the animal trials at the same time, which is completely, like, out of the norm, and that they'd actually even stopped running the animal trials because so many animals were dying that they just canceled that and just stuck with doing it to the humans. Is that right?
Yeah, they tested some of this mRNA technology in ferrets actually a while back, and it would kill them every single time. And but that was actually like I believe over 10 years ago. But what they were doing with animal trials concurrently with human trials was they were testing the biodistribution in rats. Instead of figuring out, well, where does this go in humans before we authorize it, they seemingly didn't care, so they just trialed it in rats and it went everywhere in the rat's body, and that wasn't disclosed until Freedom of Information Act requests a few years later. And, they didn't do any of the studies they had to do. They didn't do carcinogenicity studies. They didn't test to see if it would be carcinogenic. They didn't test for genotoxicity. They didn't test for any organ toxicity. They didn't test for anything, really. It was just pushing, experimenting on the human population.
And I mean, they injected it into billions of people. Like, this has gotta be, like, the largest experiment in, like, human history. Extremely dangerous stuff, and I know that this is controversial because even when I speak about it with my audience, I have gotten a lot of pushback of, claiming that I'm a conspiracy theorist or this or that. I had the personal experience, so I know a lot of people talk about it, and it's because they heard about it that somebody else had an experience. I lived it, so I know. So it's not me just making something up. I have the photos from me being in a coma, that my wife took, and I have the medical records. So this is definitely not something that I'm just making up. And the evidence of it is becoming so much more abundant that this was extraordinarily dangerous and it did cost lives. But on the flip side, the other argument then is, yes, it may have caused some deaths, but look at how many it saved. But did it really save lives? Because we literally had millions of deaths from COVID, from people who had taken the vaccine.
Yeah, no, in fact, there were a few studies that claimed, and I'll tell you why it was completely false. They claimed it saved, tens of millions of lives. But then a few more studies came out that analyzed those papers and completely deconstructed the fraudulent modeling tactics that they use to claim and save millions of lives. So first of all, you cannot observe lives saved. It's completely theoretical, right? And so it's just some kind of estimate based on a mathematical model. Now, what they did in the flagship study in the Lancet that was claiming 15 million lives saved, they assumed in the mathematical model that the vaccine stopped transmission. And we know 100% now, it's even admitted by the mainstream authorities that they do not stop transmission whatsoever. So the main input of claiming lives were saved is completely false. Like you can't claim that whatsoever. What we do observe and what we have observed was massive excess mortality. So more people dying than normal since 2021 across the globe. And so
Yeah.
that's observed. Like that actually occurred. Tens of millions of extra people died not from COVID-19, observable data. And so what killed these people? There's only a few answers. One, lockdowns, caused disruptions, but that didn't kill tens of millions. That's not plausible. What is plausible is that people were injected with a highly lethal gene transfer technology that we now have thousands of studies documenting the serious adverse events and why they occur. And you're right, they didn't stop COVID. People get vaccinated. They actually now we have 8 studies showing they have a higher chance of getting COVID from the shots. Actually, there's nine studies now. It's called negative efficacy. That means once the antibodies wear off from the vaccine after 6 months, you're more likely to get infected than if you were never vaccinated. And there's many mechanisms that play into that. And it's just, you cannot vaccinate out of a respiratory pandemic. It's not possible, particularly using mRNA technology. It's not eliciting any respiratory system immunity. And so it's just going to invade you anyways, and you're going to suffer the serious adverse events from the shot as well. And it was just a complete disaster. And yeah, none of this stuff is conspiracy. This is all documented in the scientific literature now. They literally find the messenger RNA in the hearts of deceased individuals. Like it's in
And
the
that's
heart. They find the spike
exactly what
protein.
my yeah, that's exactly what my cardiologist finally says, like, "We'll never actually know until you die and we do an autopsy." And I was like, "Oh, that's just fantastic."
Yeah. Yeah, no, but that's true. You can't, take out large chunks of, somebody's heart and, start looking for vaccine materials. I mean, you can take a small biopsy, but nobody wants to do that. And, it's just, there's so much stuff that's occurred, and yeah, the millions lives saved claim has been completely destroyed. It's not true. In fact, we're working on a study looking at the excess mortality with the shots, and guess how many studies we found that have identified an increase in deaths from the shot? About 30. So, this is not a joke. And these are worldwide
Yeah.
data sets, all different ones finding different things. And oh, but the most recent paper that came out was they looked in 15,000 nursing homes, and the vaccinated elderly compared to the unvaccinated elderly. The vaccinated elderly actually had a longer period of increased death risk compared to the unvaccinated after infection. So say you had 0 doses, you got infected, you had about a week of an excess death risk. If you had 1 vaccine dose or 2 vaccine doses, you would have about 2 to 3 weeks of an excess death risk after infection. So it was increasing the period of which
Mm.
are more likely to die, right? So again, these did not work.
So, and that's what you were talking about. His claim is that it's stopping the transmission. But as a perfect example, all of my kids are all young adults. They are all living in the same house, and they all had by that time they had all had their first booster shot. So they had two shots, and one of them got COVID, and within 3 days, everybody in the house had COVID. Right. Fortunately, I wasn't there, so I have never actually had COVID. I had the symptoms of a rejection of the spike protein and everything, and that caused my heart issue. But I've never had COVID. And then my wife, who's had both booster shots, she actually ended up getting COVID after the second booster shot within like 3 or 4 months. So this was after my issue. And so that's why I was always like, "Well, okay, I thought this was supposed to stop the transmission. That's the whole reason why we're putting ourselves as guinea pigs here for an untested drug or a vaccine. Why are we all getting, well, not me, but why is everybody in my family getting sick and catching COVID?" And, then so kind of like the narrative from the government came out is, well, it's going to stop transmission. And then when it was proven that, okay, it's not actually stopping transmission, but it's going to lessen your symptoms. And I witnessed like all of my family, it didn't seem like it was lessening their symptoms. I mean, they were hit hard and they had all been fully vaccinated. So what kind of studies right now are showing that, like, is it even lessening the symptoms? But like you said, I mean, it's actually increasing the chance of death when you have it.
Yeah, so the thing is there's the in the peer-reviewed literature, there's so much conflicting evidence, right? And so, yeah, there will be some studies that claim, decreased symptoms or decreased hospitalizations. But even if some of those were true, that effect would only last for a few months and does not take into account the damage done by the shot, right? So it's like you have to start thinking, even if it did, and now we know that the latest strains, Omicron, and then after that, those are very mild. They're not causing the blood clotting syndromes we saw with Delta and Alpha back in 2020. Like, yeah, those did cause some serious issues, though that those strains that initially were closely related to the Wuhan strain. And so, but now there's just, I mean, there's no reason. to subject yourself to another gene therapy dose. Particularly now, I mean, we just published a paper. We found in an individual that was injured messenger RNA, spike protein, and DNA plasmids, which is the DNA left over from the manufacturing process in an individual 3.5 years after his last shot. So it was depositing in some of his tissues. We don't know what tissue it was in, but we could detect it in his skin, a skin biopsy, in what's called his exosomes. These are circulating messenger molecules in the body. And so there's some sort of reservoir that is inducing this unlimited expression of these materials. So, unfortunately, in some individuals, who received hot lots that were contaminated with DNA. It may have integrated into some of those individuals.
Yeah. So, I mean, when this whole thing started, if you were to even question the science, you'd be kicked off social media. Like you would be banned, you'd be blackballed, you'd be blacklisted, your accounts would be taken down, everything. Why was it such a, in your opinion, I know this might be out of your field, maybe a little bit more my field in the media, but why, in your opinion, was there such a huge pushback against this particular vaccine versus the hundreds of vaccines that are out there right now? And there are people that talk, about this scientific study that it doesn't work or that scientific study that doesn't work, and they don't have any repercussions. But this particular thing with COVID, it seemed like the media and the government were just shoving this down our throats and we didn't have a choice.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're accurate. They've censored everything. All the major social media companies, the US government was collaborating and talking with social media companies, telling them to censor this information. The FDA hid safety signals. Ron Johnson just came out today in a Senate hearing. He said and he's issued a few reports on these already with like millions of pages of evidence, literally, that the FDA buried and hid myocarditis signals and stroke signals. And they were working with some sort of technology to mask adverse events in the vaccine adverse event reporting system. And so this is all coming out now. The government lied to you, they buried the data, and they censored people who would speak out. And so
Yeah.
it's real. It was a major conspiracy against the American people.
I kind of equate it to the tobacco industry. Back in the 50s and 60s, media, tobacco, and the government were all in cahoots to produce and sell more tobacco. Uh, and if you were to even come out and try and say that tobacco causes cancer or has health risks, you were just immediately shut down. But then, after years and years and years of data saying that, yeah, smoking is actually extraordinarily harmful for you, you should not do it, then the narrative changed. And I kind of feel like that's where we're at now with the whole COVID thing and the vaccines, is where now a few years have gone by, we have more data, we have more people speaking out, more people waking up. They're like, yeah, we trusted the government. The government has never been one to tell us the truth about anything. So I don't know why all of a sudden we just started trusting them about injecting experimental things into our body. And I fell for it. I did. I was a big proponent of it because, at the time, my business, I had to meet with customers all the time. And I was like, I don't want to infect anybody and I don't want to get infected. And so I'm going to go and get the shot. And, I swallowed the pill just like everybody else did. And, I suffered the consequences of it. I want to transition into another specialty of yours and some things that you've been talking about, which is cancer and treatments for cancer. Personal story, I just lost my father-in-law last year. He was a very healthy, never smoked, never drank, still, in his 60s, was still knocking out 100 plus push-ups every single morning, very fit, not overweight, anything like that. And all of a sudden, he was just complaining to my sister-in-law that his eye was hurting. They took him to the doctor, couldn't figure out what was going on. They did the brain scan, and he had a tumor the size of my fist in his brain, and he was gone within about 2 months. So he went from being a very fit, healthy guy, and then cancer just popped up in his brain and just took him like that, like unexpected. Now, I know that the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have necessarily the impetus to cure cancer, but to treat it because treating it is profitable, curing it is not. But you've been talking about some interesting things in regards to cancer. What should people know that again, the government, the media, and the pharmaceutical companies are not telling us?
Yeah. So there's lots going on with cancer. Obviously, it's the second leading cause of death in the globe. Thousands of Americans are diagnosed with cancer every day. 1 in 3 Americans are projected to develop cancer in their lifetime. So it's a very, serious situation that needs to be addressed. And clearly, what we're doing now is not working. You're right, chemotherapy, it's not curative. They even tell you it's not curative. It's just supposed to, help treat it and destroys your body in the process. And it costs over 100 grand a year. So, we got to get away from these, caveman like thinking of injecting highly poisonous agents into the body to clear cancer. We got to find the targeted approaches and safe approaches and more effective approaches. And so, one thing that we recently looked at is with the antiparasitics. We looked at the antiparasitics and their potential for cancer treatment because there's been hundreds of laboratory and animal studies that expose, mice with tumors or, cancer cells in the lab to ivermectin, membendazole, fenbendazole, and it destroys them via, 14 distinct mechanisms. And then there's been a few case reports of individuals experiencing remission or complete remission with antiparasitics. And so what we did was, we did the largest human study to date on these antiparasitics in cancer. We had 200 cancer patients. They were prescribed off label compounded ivermectin and membendazole capsules for their cancer treatment. They were licensed by they were prescribed by a licensed physician. And we looked at their baseline status, and then we looked 6 months later, 6 months after they started taking this ivermectin and mebendazole. And what's very shocking is 84.4% of them benefited in their cancer from this. And what makes up that 84.4% is three things. One is what's called no evidence of disease. That means the cancer disappeared. That was 32%. So 32% of those cancer patients had no more cancer. They reported after 6 months. 15% said their tumors shrank and the cancer was actively kind of regressing. 36% said that the cancer stopped spreading. So it was not spreading anymore. And so that means 84.4% benefited. And so that's a crazy clinical benefit ratio. That is so high that you don't see that with chemo. Chemo, the clinical benefit ratio ranges from about 10% to about as high as 50, 60% with all the
Okay.
side effects. And so this is very promising. And now we need to do larger trials and double blind, placebo controlled trials to really, hone in on safety, dosing, and efficacy.
So what is it about the antiparasitic mechanism that you think is attacking the cancer cells or causing the body to attack the cancer cells? How is that working right now as far as the information that we have?
Yeah. So among these 14 mechanisms, about 8 or 9 of them relate to what's called cancer cell signaling. So, in the laboratory, when they expose cancer cells to the antiparasitics, it cuts off this what's called cancer cell signaling. So, those are the signals, the messages of how the cancer cells communicate to each other to help grow, right? And so,
Mm,
if you cut that communication off, they're going to have a hard time growing. But But then you get to cancer stem cells. Ivermectin has been shown to destroy cancer stem cells. Chemo does not. And cancer stem cells are the source of cancers, many cancers, not all of them, and they cause cancer reoccurrence. So while you might eliminate some cancers with surgery, radiation, chemo, the cancer stem cells are still there. And so the cancer will come
Yeah.
back. With these ivermectin and mebendazole, it destroys those. And then you have something called microtubule disruption with mebendazole specifically. That is like the scaffolding inside the cells when they divide. If you destroy that in cancer cells, they won't be able to divide. And then it does a few other things. It cuts off angiogenesis. It cuts off blood flow to these tumors. It triggers apoptosis specifically in cancer cells, so that's programmed cell death. And again, it's just so many different things that are documented to happen biologically in tumors and cancer cells with these antiparasitics.
Yeah. So, if that is being shown to be very effective right now, why is not the pharmaceutical companies jumping all over this?
No money, no money to be made, no patents to be issued. They can't patent ivermectin or mebendazole or fenbendazole. They can't make 100 grand a year per patient, and they could make maybe a few grand a year. But then their rival companies are going to sell the same thing, and then
Yeah.
they won't be able to own a biologic and make hundreds of millions of dollars. And so they're not going to spend tens of millions, hundreds of millions on a clinical trial because there's no incentive for them to do that. And so that's what's
Yeah.
very disappointing. All these repurposed cancer drugs, natural compounds for cancer, they just don't study them in the highest quality types of clinical trials we can do. They don't do it because they're not incentivized to do it.
And I think that that's probably the best argument for, getting rid of the capitalist model when it comes to medicine, because I think that if you had a universal medical system, it would be more incentivized to curing, because that saves money, saves taxpayer money by curing diseases rather than just treating them and making billions of dollars in profits off of it. And I know, I lean slightly conservative, and I get some pushback on that, like, "Oh, you want socialized medicine." And I was like, "Well, I don't want what we have now, because what we have right now is you get sick, you go bankrupt, or you just die, pretty much. That's where we're at with it, and that's not a real medical system. That's just a profiteering off of illness and death, in my opinion. Now, I know a lot of people are gonna push back on that. That's fine, everybody has their opinion, but that's just how I feel about it because I've been through it. I know what it means. Like, my even with all my deductibles and everything from my own hospital stay were just outrageous. And I had really good health care, or at least I thought I had really good health coverage, until I really got sick. And then I looked at the bill and I was like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. So imagine, people who don't have good health coverage and they get sick and they have to go to the hospital, and then they get hit with a $150,000 bill from the hospital and they can't pay it. And now they're bankrupt. They lose everything. That should not be the situation in America. Like, we're a first world country. How can we not have the best healthcare at an affordable price that everybody can live with? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. But I mean, we can send billions of dollars for wars and to kill people, but we can't save our own people with healthcare.
Yeah, we can spend a
Circle back
billion
real
dollars
quick.
a day. $1 billion a day on, bombs and missiles
Yeah.
and destroying bridges and, universities, but we can't spend, just a few million on a repurposed cancer drug trial that could potentially save an untold number of cancer victims. Yeah, it's very disappointing.
I mean, and if you look at the people who are in charge, and I'm not talking about the presidency, because if you really look at it, yes, the president has a lot of power, but it's really the people that are behind the scenes that are the most scary. Those are the people that control pretty much our entire economy. And if you look at their statements, that many of them have said they would love to see the world's population cut by 2/3. Well, how do you achieve that? I don't know, a pandemic maybe? Maybe engineer something to where, people can't breed anymore, so the just naturally we just die off without kids. It's very scary because if you do cure, like you're saying, like for, just millions of dollars compared to our military budget, we could save so many millions of people, but then the problem becomes, well, now those people are still here and they're consuming. And the rich and the powerful and the elite, they want to reduce the population, so that they can have more and more and more share. I think that that's kind of where we're at right now. I don't buy the fact that a lot of people say that our current world population is not sustainable with what the earth can produce. When you look at it, humans live on, I think, about 3% of the landmass of the world. So there's vast amounts of land and ocean on this planet that is not touched by humans. So we have more resources than we could possibly imagine. We could easily sustain the world's population and triple it and still be just fine. Greenhouse gases are a problem. We need to figure out our energy solutions. But the thing is, when it comes to healthcare, the world has adopted, for the most part, this capitalist idea of profiting off of sick people. And that, in my opinion, is what's not sustainable. That's got to change.
Yeah, it's got to change. And you're right. Many elitist individuals openly say we need a lower population number. They say it basically every year at the World Economic Forum, how we need to reduce population growth. But you're right. It's absolutely nonsense. Because you're right. Yeah. What, 90% of the land mass is untouched. And, I mean, it's just ridiculous. We could have for sure accommodate billions more people if we chose to, work for the population instead of against it, like what's currently going. So, yeah, that appears the plan is to just reduce the birth rates. As we now see, it's the lowest in history in the US. A study just came out, lowest fertility rates ever recorded. And so, that's going to continue to collapse and shrink at this current rate. And, we got to stop that. And, this doesn't need to happen. But again, the elites don't care because, they're just planning on replacing the humans with AI and robots. And so that's the path we're headed down, unfortunately. Yeah, other energy systems, they have now coming out, advanced energy systems that they've probably classified, for 50 years now. And, everything has screwed us over. And that's why the world is in a state of chaos. And at least one thing we're addressing at the McCullough Foundation is the health chaos, because we got to
Yeah.
reverse this, particularly America, the sickest developed nation on earth. And but particularly, we got to stop cancer. We got to stop cancer. It shouldn't be killing tens of millions. It's been, 70 years since, a major advancement moving on from chemo. I mean, come on. We're better than that.
Speaking of that, I mean, if you look at the studies of the overall physical health in the United States of the 1950s, despite the fact that the percentage of Americans who smoked was so much higher, they had much less occurrences of cancer and heart disease compared to now. So we've reduced smoking drastically. I mean, I think, was it the less than 10 smoke regularly cigarettes now, something like that in the United States, where before it was over 65% back in the 1950s. And they ate regular butter and they ate regular food and they ate a lot of steak and all that. And yet they had so much lower heart disease, so much lower cases of cancer, and obesity was almost, non-existent. And today, obesity is, an epidemic in the United States, and heart disease, lung disease, cancer, all of those have skyrocketed. And so It's something to do with the fact that we don't eat real food anymore. We eat all this processed stuff now, and it's turning us into, these fat balloons that's just hoarding visceral fat around our organs, causing all these problems. So, what is there any studies that's linking the food to the cancer and the heart disease, particularly that we're eating now that we didn't eat in the 1940s and 50s?
Yeah, there's a bunch of studies, hundreds of studies now linking hyper-processed foods to increased risks of heart disease, cancers, dementia, diabetes, depression, sleep disorders, eating this garbage that's basically made in a factory, goes through, 20 different machines with its raw ingredients, half of which are either laboratory made and synthetic, and then the rest might be natural, but they're glazed with cancerous, carcinogenic glyphosate and herbicides. Yeah, that's going to cause lots of issues in the body, and that explains, why we saw such a drastic rise in chronic disease and cancers, over the past, 50 or so years. So yeah, it's playing a big role for sure. All of these environmental contaminants, the forever chemicals, the PFAS, and then we have the microplastics now. We have the endocrine disruptors in the plastic. I mean, we have so many different things that people are now consuming on a daily basis that cannot be escaped. You can't escape it unless you live on a rural area and you grow your own food. And
Yeah.
so that's why everybody's getting sick.
I mean, that we did it after my health incident. We had already owned some acreage out in some farmland out in the Midwest or in the West Coast, and we packed up. We left our house in the city, and we moved out to our cabin. We built out a small little home. We're now tiny living on the home. This my office you can see behind me here, but then across from my office, I have my tiny home, and my health has just skyrocketed since we left the city. I eat so much better. I already tried to have a pretty good diet, but I did eat a bunch of processed food, and I always like made up in my mind, well, hey, I work out every day, I lift weights, I run, I can snack on this stuff. It's okay. Now I've completely eliminated that stuff I'm back to eating real food like chicken. Like we buy big packs of chicken and beef and stuff like that. And I butcher the stuff down myself and use real butter again, not that margarine stuff, and lots of vegetables, especially when we can get them from the farmer's market and stuff like that. And I just feel amazing. I feel so much better than I did before I even got sick when I was living in the city from the vaccine. So I know everybody can't do that, but you can do it on a micro scale because in every city there are farmers markets, there's healthy places that you can go to eat and stuff like that. Don't buy the processed stuff, man. And start making your own food. Cook your own food. Don't buy these microwavable meals for the love of God. Please do not buy microwavable meals. Cook your own food. Buy whole ingredients, cook them yourself, learn what you're putting into your body. Because if you can't, like, if you're looking at the label of something and you can't understand what the words are, you can't even pronounce them, that's probably not good for you.
100%. Everything you said is 100% accurate. And if people followed that advice, they would probably see health improvements, particularly if they're eating garbage every day. And I think most
Yeah.
people would, again, if you're sitting there eating Doritos, sitting on your desk the whole day, never getting any movement in, and then you go and start to exercise, start to make your own food with whole foods, you will, with 80% certainty feel better in at least some health domains. And because you would be giving your body the fuel and nutrients that it never had before. And you'll be increasing the blood flow by working out. You'll be reducing the depression because all the endorphins will be released. And so, yeah, if you're feeling terrible and you're doing, these bad things, sitting all day eating garbage, perhaps, it may be time to reconsider and just see how you feel for a week, just see how you feel by doing
Yeah.
doing the workouts and eating good. And I think you would like the results.
I think part of the problem too is you combine the absolutely garbage food that they're selling in the grocery stores now with the sedentary lifestyle like you was talking about, just sitting around all day. And, if you look back in the 1940s and 50s and obviously earlier than that, men were just naturally fit and strong and women were naturally slender. I mean, if you look at pictures of the beaches back in the 1950s, you didn't see any fat men or women. Everybody looked like they were a fitness model, and these are just normal, regular people not going to the gym, but they lived very active lifestyle. Like it's kind of become a dying thing. We're actually in a very critical situation in the United States with construction. Most men in the United States don't know how to build anything. They've never used a power tool. They don't, shop classes in high school are pretty much gone away with the dodo bird. Like, you don't know how to do that anymore. I grew up in a construction family, so I benefited from that. I can build a house from the ground up. I know every single thing. I did it for years, but that's a skill that most people don't have. Now we just sit at computers all day. And because you're sitting there and so we had to invent a desk that will stand up so that you can stand up because it was getting so bad. And while standing is better than sitting, it's still not out there running, doing things, hiking, all of that. So I always tell people, like, you've got to get outside. You have to. If you have any nature around you, mountains, beach, whatever it is, get outside every single day. Go for a walk, go for a jog, go for a run, lift some weights. Because if you don't, you're going to regret it the older you get, because it's much harder to get in shape in your 40s, 50s, 60s than it is in, your 20s and 30s. If you're out of shape, you're 35, you're 40 pounds overweight, 50 pounds overweight, you can still do it. If you're 65, a lot harder.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you want to get ahead of it while there's still time. Yeah, you don't want to be screwed over when you're 70, 80, regretting what you did in previous years, that's for sure. But yeah, you got to get outside. You got to get sunlight. You need optimal vitamin D levels. Again, that's going to improve, thousands of benefits, metabolic benefits in the body. In fact, if you're vaccine injured, a study came out about 83% of those who got sunlight and raised their vitamin D resolved their long vaccine syndrome. Right. So, and then another study found for myocarditis specifically, those who got higher vitamin D levels who were low raised it to high, they had less severe heart damage, less, they needed to go to the hospital less, and they felt better. And so, and then it decreases all-cause mortality, right? You're less likely to die if you have adequate vitamin D, particularly from sun. And so, yeah, it's
What
important to
about
go outside.
sunscreen? Because I know there's a lot of studies out there about sunscreen, these chemicals that we're putting into our skin. Skin is the largest organ in the human body. A lot of people don't know that. It absorbs everything. So when you put lotion on it, you put sunscreen on it, you put perfume on it, it's going to absorb it into your bloodstream. Is sunscreen actually safe? Because I know a lot of people are saying that sunscreen actually causes cancer. Is that accurate, or are there studies that show that?
Yeah, it is accurate. There's a few studies, particularly when you use the dangerous versions of sunscreen, which include things like titanium dioxide as the reflective agent, or aluminum as the reflective agent. And that, yeah, that just gets into the body and causes genotoxicity and all sorts of other issues. It deposits, somewhere in the bloodstream, can travel to the brain and all sorts of places you don't want it. And so, I personally, I go out in the sun, I don't use sunscreen, but if I do, the only time I would say where I would use sunscreen is if, like, yeah, for sure I'll get burned, right? I'm in some low latitude area and I'll be outside for like 10 hours straight, you know. Yeah, I'll put something on, but it's not going to be titanium dioxide or aluminum. It'll just be zinc oxide, zinc
Yeah.
with you know, as few chemical additives as possible. You know, but you know, if I'm going outside for, you know, a few hours, an hour, yeah, I'm not gonna do it. You know, I've seen the studies. I don't want to put myself at risk for that. And, you know, for humans for the past, you know, hundreds of thousands of years, you know, they did not wear sunscreen and they did just fine.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's interesting about it because I mean, I've had some really severe sunburns in the past, and it was because I was younger and dumber, and so I was just out there with my shirt off all day long, and then all of a sudden I'm getting blisters and it's really bad sunburn. So some common sense would be wear the proper clothing if you're going outside for extended periods of time. It's much less toxic to put on a shirt than to put on, like you said, some titanium or aluminum into your skin. So, a quick question about caffeine. I love caffeine. I love stimulant from caffeine. I take a pre workout drink that has caffeine in it. What are your thoughts on caffeine? I know like it needs to be moderated. You don't want to be consuming 600 milligrams of caffeine a day with, you know, these energy drinks and stuff that have high doses or consuming a lot of them. I used to. I used to drink energy drinks 4 or 5 days, especially when I was doing construction when I was younger. I would drink 4 or 5 of those in one day, and I'm, like, peaking out at, like, 1,200 milligrams caffeine in a day, um, and that would cause me extreme heartburn, and I ended up getting, some esophageal damage, and I had to have that treated. So, definitely don't do that, but does 135 grams a day of or milligrams a day of caffeine, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Does it show benefits for the heart or is it negative?
Yeah, well, it seems most of the benefit with caffeine comes from what form it's inside of, or what beverage it's inside of. Like, for example, coffee, you know, has, you know, hundreds of different chemicals in it, some of which are beneficial for the body. It's called polyphenols, which can, you know, help reduce some heart issues and improve blood flow, circulation, etc., act as antioxidants. And then, you know, you have green tea or yerba mate. Again, these have large numbers of antioxidants in them, which are consumed in conjunction with the caffeine. So it appears lots of benefit comes from all of that. Now, there are studies that indicate the caffeine itself can improve some, you know, obviously cognition speed, cognition scores, and can improve depression in some cases, and can reduce chances of dementia and Alzheimer's. So, you know, there are some positive studies on it, but you know, I would say, and personally, I'll drink a coffee every morning. You know, it keeps me focused, but there is a trade off, and think, and based on a few studies, you know, you if you drink caffeine in any form every day, your sleep is not going to be the same if you didn't drink any. It's not going to be the same. It will not be as
Yeah.
restorative because the caffeine half life is very long. It stays in circulation. So if you drink a big coffee in the morning, 200 milligrams, by nighttime, you know, 10, 11 a.m., you know, you will still have caffeine circulating, and, you know, the sleep's not gonna be as good. And so I guess for people to know, you know, if they wanna keep taking it or not, just try to take a week off and see how you feel. And if you feel
Yeah.
bad, you know, and it helps you work, then, you know, I would take it. But yeah, currently I take it. There are benefits to coffee, there are benefits to tea, green tea, and these other beverages. So, yeah, I think, it's not deadly, though, you know, it's not increasing risks of death. It's not increasing, you know, disease based on the papers I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, so for example, I left off all of the, you know, main energy drinks that you buy at the store. I actually started with this one here. So this one is from a company called Voom, and they're like trying to change the game. So it has 10 grams of protein, zero sugar, it's green tea extract, no artificial flavors. You can actually read all of the ingredients, clean protein, and it or clean caffeine, has 135 milligrams, comes in a bunch of different sparkly water type flavors. This one is watermelon, key lime. They have a dragon fruit one, which is actually my favorite. I love this one. Once I switched over to this one, I actually quit drinking coffee, and because one of the trade offs with coffee too is yellowing of the teeth, right? So it makes you look like a smoker, even though you don't smoke. Where this one doesn't do it. So this has been a really good transition for me. I've completely stopped drinking coffee since I switched over to these. I will leave a link down. I mean, I don't make anything off of it, but I'll leave a link down in the description of this video if people want to find out where to get this, because I don't think you can just buy this in the store. I've never seen it in stores. You have to order it, but it's really good. And that's why I wanted to ask, because I agree. I think that if you're drinking caffeine, I know for me personally, if I consume more than say 150 grams, milligrams of caffeine a day, then it kind of not has the effect on me anymore. I like almost feel like I'm immune to it now. And yeah, it gives me a little bit of a perk when I drink it, but then like I don't have the long lasting feeling from it. And so what I try to do is I don't drink caffeine every day. So if I'm going to do my pre-workout, like I'm training right now on a regimen of 6 days a week, but that's because I'm in a cut phase right now. So I'll drop that back to 4 days a week and then 3 days off intermittent in between. And so when I do that, I won't take my pre-workout. And then sometimes I intentionally don't take my pre-workout, or I don't drink one of these, and I'll just have no caffeine that day. And that way it kind of gives my body the ability to reset from it so that you don't become immune. Because the problem is with caffeine, it's like any other stimulant or drug or whatever. Once your body becomes accustomed to it, you need more of it for it to be effective. So definitely, like anything else, if you're supplementing for your exercise, you need to cycle off of any type of supplements so that your body can reset, and then those supplements have more of an effect. The only one that I don't cycle off of is creatine, because I've read a lot of stories. I've been a fan of creatine for years, but the health benefit of creatine, especially as you get older, is actually now showing to have cognitive improvements as well, because it actually passes beyond the blood-brain barrier. And so for people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, like more physicians are saying, we want to put you on a creatine supplement. Have you done any work in creatine, and what do you think about the benefits or possible negatives of creatine?
Yeah, I wrote up an article on a study that recently came out on creatine and cognitive benefits. It was actually a trial, a randomized trial, and they found in sleep deprived individuals, they compared who got creatine, who didn't. Those who got creatine had like a 27% boost in cognitive processing speed um, in a very short amount of time. So it rapidly improved brain bioenergetics. And so, so we know for sure it's acting on the brain, it's acting on cognition. And then, yeah, there's like at least over 10 studies now looking at the cognitive benefits of creatine, and it makes biological sense. I mean, it's essential for basically energy production, and
Right.
your brain needs lots of energy. It uses up lots of creatine, and if you don't eat natural sources of creatine, it's it and you basically you're not going to get as much as you would from a supplement if you ate food. You would have to eat like 5,000 calories, to get the
Yeah.
same as you would from a supplement. So it's very easy to just take a creatine powder or, what have you, a pill if that's easier. But yeah, for sure. I'm a fan of it. And obviously, you get the strength benefits while modest. It's obviously helpful to get anything you can get with a
Yeah.
safe and cheap supplement.
And it's one of the things, like, I've been considering. At some point, I will probably get on TRT as I age and get older. I think the benefits, a lot of studies have proven that the benefits of getting on TRT just help you to live a more fulfilled life as you get older. The problem is people think that these supplements cure the problem. If you're still eating junk food every day and sitting on your couch and scrolling through YouTube and Instagram all day, taking creatine, TRT, any other vitamin supplements, you're still going to be obese. You're still going to have respiratory problems, heart problems, all that. So it's got to be, a combination of getting out there, being physically active, resistance training, especially for men, to make sure that you can maintain some muscle mass as you age. But the same thing for women as well. A lot of women think that they don't need to do any resistance training because they need to be feminine and delicate. And that's actually the opposite because all throughout human history, women needed to be physically fit because they were the ones carrying the water. They were the ones picking up the heavy things and doing all of these manual labor things while the men were out earning, hunting, fishing, all of this other stuff to bring home the food. So the women were very fit throughout human history, and now they've become extraordinarily sedentary, and that's just a horrible idea for your health. So you got to combine it with physical fitness. You got to combine it with a good, healthy diet. Stop eating junk food, and then I always like to throw in some intermittent fasting as well. Lots of studies that I've read have shown the physical benefits, including releasing your own stem cells to repair, inflammation and damage in your joints and stuff like that from doing a 72-hour water fast. So more and more of these natural ways of repairing our body that humans have always known, but for the past 50 years, we seem to have forgotten with all of this industrialization to keep yourself healthy. Like it's really not rocket scientist to stay healthy. It's pretty easy. We've forgotten. We've become too complacent and reliant on Walmart and 7-Eleven.
Yeah. No, 100% agreed. 100% agreed. We got to get healthier. We're suffering, majority 60% of Americans have at least one chronic disease. We got to do something about it. And the government's not going to fix your chronic disease for you. So you got to take matters into your own hands.
100%. Well, brother, thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. I'll leave links down in the description where you can go and check out the foundation and read more of his work as well as his social media. He's putting out some fantastic knowledge. Thank you so much for spending the time with us today to help educate myself and the audience in some of these very important topics that we're facing as humanity right now.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Anytime. Love to have you back, guys. You know what to do. Hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next episode. Stay safe, stay free.